I want to welcome everyone for a quick Gatekeeper training. This training is called QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. It is here to train people to recognize warning signs of someone who might be experiencing a suicidal crisis, or really any type of an emotional crisis, how to ask important questions directly, how to persuade them that there's hope and help available, and then how to refer them to that appropriate help. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce you to my co-facilitator, Misty Von Allen. Misty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone, and happy Boxing Day. It's so lovely to be up here in Hawaii, and I'm the Suicide Prevention Coordinator with the state of Nevada. I am going to be monitoring the chat as Shannon does her presentation, and then we're going to switch towards the end. But I'm going to put my email and my cell phone in. If anything comes up during this conversation or beyond, I'm going to be sticking around until about Monday if we want to have further conversations. So thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Misty. My name is Shannon Decker. I'm the executive director and co-founder of a nonprofit that's based primarily in Idaho. That nonprofit is called the Speedy Foundation, and our mission is to prevent suicide, support mental health, and promote conversations to end stigma that surrounds suicide and mental health. We were founded back in 2011 in memory of my cousin, Jarrett Speedy Peterson. He grew up in Idaho and Eastern Oregon and started a career in freestyle skiing. And so that took him down into Utah. He spent a lot of time in his career talking about mental health and talking about experiences that happened in childhood whenever he had a platform to talk about these things. And it was unique. It was different. We didn't talk about mental health openly. We didn't talk about child abuse or sexual abuse with the media. It just was very taboo. But he advocated for himself and eventually lost his battle with substance use and depression. And at the time, Idaho was one of the only states that didn't have a suicide prevention hotline call center. And that was one of the first things that we set out to do. Idaho now does have a call center. We've got a lot of other resources, as does Nevada. And so we're in a very unique position here in Duck Valley to start to figure out what resources are available that can lean in and help support your community at this time. And so after the hotline, the Speedy Foundation started looking at trainings. And one of the best trainings that we found, the training that really was an aha for our family, was Question, Persuade, Refer. The takeaway from the work that I've done in this is that time and time again, I have been presented with people in crisis, and I've known in my gut that they were in crisis, but I didn't know what to do and I didn't know what to say. And so that really became the mission that drives me forward in presenting trainings like Question, Persuade, Refer. Ask a question, save a life. We have a little video. It's a little bit older, but I think that it really speaks to the power of what we can do with this type of information. How can we start to have more direct conversations with people that we know are struggling? Once we recognize the warning signs that something isn't going well, or we know that they have risk factors, what can we do to help get them connected to care, to persuade them that there's a reason for being here, a purpose for them. What is their role in our lives? So this is about a 10-minute video. Sit back and relax. Here we go.
Come on, guys. Let's get to practice.
Clayton Little Dog is 17 years old. He recently led his team in winning the regional basketball championship for the first time in his school's history. Clayton has always been a leader. He'll be the first boy in his family to attend college, having been chosen to receive a full-ride basketball scholarship. Clayton recently told one of his coaches that he'd like to find a way to make all the pressures in his life go away forever.
Happy birthday to you.
John Highhawk is celebrating his 60th birthday. Surrounded by his tioshpaye and takojas, his extended family and grandchildren, this seems to be one of the happiest days of his life. But last week, John mentioned to his daughter that since he lost Lois, his wife of 41 years, his whole world feels very empty. More and more, he feels he's becoming a burden to his family. Carol Yellowbird has appeared to live what most people believe is the good life. Despite her history of abuse as a child and the loss of 2 loved ones through suicide, she has built a respected career in the Indian Health Service as a nurse. In fact, Carol is in line for a promotion, something she has been working toward for months. Unfortunately, Carol will be arrested today for drunk driving and leaving the scene of an accident. Her addiction to alcohol was suspected by colleagues and supervisors before. This incident will not only confirm their suspicions, but may cost Carol her job as well. In the next 3 months, Clayton, John, and Carol will make the same decision that scores of other Native Americans from every region of the country make every day. They will attempt suicide. Is someone you know thinking about suicide? Do you know the warning signs? Do you know what to do? A suicide crisis can be survived. People who become suicidal usually only remain so for a few days, or perhaps a few weeks. During this time, a person considering suicide needs help you can give. Talking about suicide is uncomfortable for most of us. We are afraid that we might push a friend or a relative over the edge. Our uncertainty makes us want to turn away, leaving the sufferer feeling more alone than ever. Most people who consider ending their life send warning signs that they are in trouble. In just 1 hour, you can learn to recognize the warning signs and how to offer support. The training is called QPR, and everyone should learn to use it. In the same way that thousands of Americans are saved each year by CPR, QPR training will provide you with the skills to put an end to the tragedy of suicide in Indian country. QPR was created by Dr. Paul Quinnett, psychologist and author of Suicide, the Forever Decision.
QPR is designed to teach people, regardless of their background, how to make a positive difference in the life of someone they know. Like CPR, learning what to do at the time it needs to be done can save lives, and that's what QPR is about. We know that most people who take their own lives are suffering from some acute stress situation or in a major relationship conflict, or are suffering from a quite treatable brain disorder. Substance abuse, drug and alcohol addiction greatly increase the risk for suicide. Suicide is our last taboo. We've talked about cancer, we've talked about sex, now we've talked about incest and domestic violence. And it's my hope that if we can talk about suicide as comfortably as these other subjects, we can really start to save lives.
Our son Brad was 16 years old. He turned 16 years old September 20th. And December 18th, 2001, he took his own life. Brad had a girlfriend. Her name was Annie, and she was 14. And she took her life November 24th, 2001. Brad, his heart was broken.
That night, we all were sitting around the couch, and of course, our kids were old, and them older, and we asked them, what did they want for Christmas, and they were naming off things, and then Brad says, well, what I want wouldn't fit underneath the Christmas tree, so.
As a mother, I thought he was doing well. He didn't talk about harming himself, but of course I didn't ask because then I didn't know about suicide education.
We didn't, I didn't expect it. We didn't expect it. It was like just a shock,
Well, since Brad's death, we've learned that several of his relatives and close friends have told their aunt or uncle or mother, father, and they in turn told us back that Brad did make comments about dying. It's hard. It's hard living without one of your children.
So my healing is when I'm out in the pasture, his grave's right there. So when I go by, I just stop and talk to him. And
I lost my husband, Willie, to an illness last year, and I didn't think I could go on without him. I was taking medication for my high blood pressure, and I just quit taking it because I didn't want to live any longer without him. Then my sister encouraged me to go and see the doctor, and with the doctor's help, he asked me a bunch of questions and to deal with my depression. And I am so grateful that he was there for me.
This problem and this challenge of young people taking their lives, there are many reasons. There are many, many reasons, and there have to be many, many answers and solutions. And those lie, of course, in the community. The communities where the issues are occurring, where the lives are being lost, as well as an understanding of what communities can do and probably shouldn't do as well, those that aren't experiencing the situation. There are many programs, there are many ways of approaching this. QPR is one that is very helpful.
The concept of repetitive training, such as CPR training or QPR training, can allow you to react instinctively to help the patient. Physicians need that reinforcement, just as office personnel or other people who deal with patients need that kind of reinforcement. We don't do things by instinct or guessing. You have to have an organized approach to a problem, and QPR makes sense.
I feel like I'm part of a system that's been trained in QPR. Parents will call me up and say, Jeff is not transitioning into the school year very well. I'm noticing a lot of stress. The football coach will stop by and says something's off with Jeff. He's just not performing up to his potential. And then a couple friends will stop by and say, we're really concerned about Jeff. Put those pieces together and that formed a tight safety net where you know the application of QPR. I'll just bring Jeff in my office and ask him, are you thinking of killing yourself? Most often they'll say yes. If I don't ask them, they won't tell me. Once they come out with it, we can deal with it, tighten the safety net, and that alone can save a life.
To save a life from suicide, we all need a little knowledge, some courage, and permission to talk about suicide openly. QPR provides all of this and sends a message of hope. Ask a question, save a life. It's something we can all learn to do.
Right. So looking at that, we're here today. Hopefully we're going to be here together for about an hour to talk about suicide prevention efforts. And we talk about suicide prevention as a metaphor of a stream. We've got opportunities for prevention embedded, at the mouth of the source of the water, all the way down to where there's a waterfall. So prevention efforts are all across in nooks and crannies of life, but sometimes we don't have everything in place. We don't have every opportunity to meet someone and they get to this falls. And at the falls, this might be where we have a suicide attempt or a completed suicide. And that postvention piece where the water settles again, this is another incredible opportunity for prevention to take place. And so as Misty and I are visiting here in Duck Valley for the holiday, we know that you are grieving. You're grieving an incredible loss in your community. And we are devastated for you on this. We also know that this is one of the greatest opportunities to start putting additional pieces in place to help folks grieve, to talk about it openly and to figure out what needs to come in so that we can prevent future folks from getting to the point of the falls. Looking at the United States, these are data statistics that are about 2 years out. So these statistics come from 2018. But really what I want to do is just take a snapshot at the United States. Those dark blue states, Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, these states have the highest suicide rate. Alaska. These have the highest suicide rates, and they do year after year after year. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of contributing risk factors that are common in these states. And so when we look at it, we can identify that we're not alone, and that there is a regional approach that needs to be taken in states like Nevada and Idaho to address suicide prevention. Some of the facts and figures is that, suicide is the second leading cause of death for folks in their middle years. That's risen from third leading cause of death. And as we start to learn more about it, as we start to collect more data, as coroners become more adept at reporting suicide deaths, and as families are more comfortable with talking about it and allowing coroners to mark that as the cause of death, we're collecting more of that information, and we're starting to realize that it's a much more significant public health crisis than we understood previously. Some of the statistics, in 2018, we had 48,000 suicide deaths. Over half of them were from firearms. Nevada, it's a little bit higher at 54%, and in Idaho, it's at 61%. 3.57 male deaths to every female death. We also know that females attempt suicide at a higher rate than males. And that means that almost every 11 minutes, we have a suicide in the United States. Again, here is the data for the state of Nevada. Veterans do have a higher suicide rate. There are more suicides than homicides and motor vehicle accidents. Misty, is there anything that you would add in here?
I think the two challenges are really the youth right now and then our elders. We've been able to impact youth rates with concerted effort and prevention comprehensively, but for our elders, we have not made a dent in that rate. We have had the highest rate for decades. And so I think that's a really important piece to think about, especially we could help each other. The elders and the youth coming together with connection, I think would be an option.
Thank you. I would say the same is true in Idaho. We have very high elder suicide rates there as well. But I think looking at Native suicide rates, this data is a little bit older. I have limited access to the internet, and so I need to find a more updated image. This one comes from data between 1999 and 2013, but it's comparing the age of suicide between Indian and Alaska Natives compared to United States. And so what we can see is that between the ages of 10 to 44, Indians have a higher rate of suicide. But things start to change in those older years. Once somebody makes it to age 45, that risk starts to go down. That is a huge piece right there. We know that to come of age in your culture is a protective factor. So what can we figure out to do for those younger generations? That's what we need to figure out we can do to build up, to foster, and to create strengths. We know that mental health in Native communities, that there's some serious psychological distress, about 1.5 times more than the general population. There's extreme post-traumatic stress that takes place. PTSD, I would get rid of the D. It's not necessarily a disorder, it's an injury. The post-traumatic stress of just compounded stress after stress after stress. It's not just war, and it's not just a car crash. It's just continual stress. and it's experienced more than twice as often than the general population in the United States. Another contributing factor for mental health here is the experience of alcohol and drug addiction. It happens at younger ages and at higher rates than any other ethnic group in our country. For every person that we lose to suicide, for every death, we can estimate that there are about 25 attempts. And so when we're thinking about a small community, we need to be thinking about, are these attempts being identified? Are they being treated by a clinician, or are they going unnoticed? The impact of suicide. So following a single death, there's about 115 people that are exposed. This is, of course, just statistically. We used to think that about 6 people were impacted, but we know that it's a different type of grief and that there are far more people that are exposed. Out of those 115 people, about 53 will have a short disruption in their life. It will impact them. There'll be a disruption, but they'll get back. 25 people have a very major life disruption. It's going to be incredibly difficult for them. They're going to need some assistance in processing that grief. But 11 people are going to have a devastating effect on their life. This is especially severe in a small, tight-knit community. That might be a small community like Duck Valley, or it could be a large high school in a very urban area. It's going to have a big impact on that community. And so we have to take a community approach. It's not just a school's responsibility or a business's responsibility or a family's responsibility. This is a big impact, and we need to bring in a lot of people to help support it. So if we have 1 death due to suicide every 11 minutes, that means 11 new people are experiencing devastation every 11 minutes. So in the United States, we've got 1,419 new survivors every day. And many survivors become activists, and they take a stand and they start to advocate so that people don't have to experience the type of pain that they have just gone through and continue to live. But there's hope and there's help out there. And if you are one of these people that has been profoundly impacted by suicide, there are a lot of resources. There's a lot of support. There's grief groups, and there's organizations all across the country and all across the world to help curb suicide. As we look at COVID-19, the term that I've heard used mainly up in Canada is an echo pandemic. We've got a physical health crisis of COVID-19. And so that has another wave that crashes down upon it. We have an economic crisis on top of COVID. And upon the economic crisis, we have a third wave. We've got a mental health crisis, a substance use crisis, a domestic violence crisis. And at this time, we have pretty steady suicide rates across the country. But we do know that if we don't put prevention in place, if we don't start preparing and getting resources out there, it's possible that we could have a 4th wave. We could have a suicide spike. And we need to think about it as far as in education. We have an MTSS model. We have an RTI model. I know Nevada does MTSS. Idaho does RTI. We have universal precautions. We have universal application of various pieces. And for people who need a little bit more, there's a tier 2. We give a little bit more. And for people who are in significant need, we give a tier 3. And that's the community approach we really need to be taking towards this echo pandemic. Everyone is going to need some additional support. Some people are going to need just a little bit more, and some are going to need some significant support. So how are we doing that in Nevada, in Idaho, and here in Duck Valley? So we're going to launch into QPR. We're going to learn the skills, how to question, how to persuade, and how to refer. This is not intended to be a form of counseling or treatment. It is intended to offer hope through positive action so that we feel far less hopeless as we deal with friends and loved ones and ourselves in times of crisis. There's a lot of myths and facts about suicide. One myth is that no one can stop a suicide. It's inevitable. That's something that as a society we've believed over time, and that's just not true. The fact is that if people in crisis get the help that they need, they will probably never be suicidal again. Another myth is that confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase their risk of suicide. But the opposite is true. Asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers their anxiety. It opens up communication and it lowers the risk of an impulsive act. People who experience thoughts of suicide sometimes report that they feel like a pressure cooker and that they're keeping everything bottled up inside. They're trying not to be a burden to the ones that they love. They want to appear to be strong. And so for you to be the person who can ask a question like, are you having thoughts of suicide? It allows them to push that button, to release the steam, and to be genuine, to not feel like they are burdening you with this emotional feeling. Another myth is that only experts can prevent suicide. But the fact is that it's everyone's business and anyone can help prevent the tragedy of suicide. A myth is that suicidal people keep their plans to themselves, but oftentimes people are communicating their intent during the week preceding their attempt. A myth is that, people who are talking about suicide don't do it. But the fact is that people who do talk about suicide, they might try it or they might complete it. And it's a very self-destructive and community destructive act. Another myth is that once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. But the fact is that it's the most preventable kind of death. Almost any positive action can help save a life. I also want to say, as we go into QPR, that we are learning this today. We can't be looking at this in hindsight. The what ifs, the should haves will destroy us. This is stuff that I didn't know, and I've lost 3 people who came to me with thoughts of suicide, but I didn't ask directly. We didn't talk about things directly. And if we think of the what ifs and the should haves, it will destroy us. We can only think about things in now I understand it, now I have permission to talk about suicide, and moving forward, I am empowered to do so. So how can we help? We can ask the question. So we're going to talk briefly about some theory. How does someone become suicidal? I have never been suicidal. And so for me to empathize with where a person could get to that point, I need to understand it from an academic standpoint. How does someone have that desire for suicide? Well, Dr. Thomas Joyner has a theory, the interpersonal psychological theory of suicidal behavior. And this is when a person feels that they're alone. He calls that thwarted belongingness. And he feels that they are a burden. Perceived burdensomeness. It doesn't mean that they are, but internally that's what they're perceiving. And Dr. Joyner is an academic. It's hard to get a very short, succinct explanation of this theory. So I have an older video from him on the Dr. Phil show, and we're just going to watch part of it. But as we follow up with this training, I will email you the link if you'd like to watch the full video.
Now joining us at this point is Dr. Thomas Joyner. Something out. Dr. Joyner believes that people considering suicide share 3 traits in a very common way. And the first one is feeling like a burden on other people and that their death will be worth more than their life. Talk about that.
That's right. It's the idea, the mental calculation that my death will be worth more than my life. If you truly believe that, you could see how that would facilitate suicidal behavior. And we've shown in multiple studies that it does indeed do that. Crucially, the person is mistaken in that perception, but the trick is that they don't know that they're mistaken in that perception. They believe it to be true, and it spurs suicidal behavior.
And isn't it true that most suicidal situations and dilemmas that push people over the edge are transient? That if they had just stuck it out, they tend to get better?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And there's also no question, as you've already alluded to, that there are good, effective treatments that work for the conditions that underlie suicidal behavior.
Yeah. Psychologically, therapeutically, pharmacologically, there are so many things that can give people relief.
Absolutely.
The second common trait that Dr. Joyner talks about is a feeling of loneliness or social disconnection.
If you look through the literature, the scientific literature on suicidal behavior, arguably the single most powerful risk factor of all is loneliness, a feeling of alienation from others.
Yeah, so they just don't feel like they fit, belong, so they're just on the outside looking in, so why not just leave?
That's right.
All right, and the third thing is an interesting thing that he talks about called fearlessness. regarding pain, injury, and death. People considering suicide have learned to overcome these natural fears, and you say that that's more common than cowardice or that sort of thing.
That's right. I think it's a common misunderstanding to think of people who have died by suicide as cowardly or weak. That's just not accurate. And indeed, to do something as fearsome and as daunting as death by suicide, you do require a kind of fearlessness in order to carry through.
Yeah. When we come back, we're going to talk about.
I'm going to pause it right there. I saw Misty had a comment. She said, Dr. Joyner lost his father to suicide and this became his life's work. Yes. And I skipped over when he says that, but I'm going to go back because it is powerful to hear his why for what he's doing.
Psychology at Florida State University. Now, he's written a book called Why People Die by Suicide. Let me say that again, and there's a picture of it up. Why People Die by Suicide. It's not a beach read, I understand, but it is an important, important message. Now, sadly, Dr. Joyner's own father committed suicide 18 years ago. Now, this really moved you to try to figure out how somebody with such a great and productive mind could get in such a dark place as to end their life.
That's right. My dad's death makes me feel honor bound to not only understand it, but to exact some revenge for it. Something or somebody stole my dad away from me is the way I view it. And so I feel honor bound to return that favor and exact revenge. Here it's going to be exacting revenge on suicide itself by studying it scientifically, by advocacy, and through clinical and prevention work.
Yeah, and so by helping people.
So I'm going to stop it right there. It is a powerful video. So I will send the link to it as follow-up. But if we're looking at this Venn diagram, and if you're sitting there with your own thoughts of why, how could this person choose this? How could they get there? If we understand it through the lens of they had thwarted belongingness, they felt isolated and alone, even in a family of love and support, that they felt different. I think of Speedy's story, and I share Speedy's story when I look at it through that lens of he struggled for so long and couldn't find help. He couldn't find peace. He couldn't find relief. And he felt like he was the only one, that no one else seemed to have those same struggles. And then on the other side, that perceived burdensomeness, to feel like what you're going through is a burden to those around you, to your coworkers, to your family members, to your friends. That desire starts to make sense. That capacity for suicide, that I'm not afraid to die, that can be built up through so much. Veterans, firefighters, to be able to run into a burning building, we have to build up that capacity and fearlessness. But we can't stay there. We can't live in that space forever. Another piece of that capacity for suicide is maybe just accessing means that are lethal. I had a student when I was teaching second grade up in Meridian, Idaho, and she came to me and she said, my family will be better off when I'm gone. And I said, honey, what does that mean? Because it didn't sound right. And she said, my family's going to be better off when I'm gone. And I asked her what in her world that meant. She said that when she stopped breathing, that her family would be better off. And so this was long before I knew about QPR, but I had been touched by suicide so many times that I knew in my being, in my cells, that something wasn't right. And so it sounded like it wasn't incredibly severe, but had she had access to a firearm or to a lot of medication or drugs, that capacity for suicide would have already been built for her. She wouldn't need the life experience to get there. And so thankfully she shared that with me, and I could share it with her family and with the school counselor and start putting pieces in place to help support her. So this is, again, across the lifespan. Suicide, it doesn't have barriers with socioeconomic status or culture or age or gender. We all are impacted by it in some way. All right, so suicide is really not a mystery. Suicidal behaviors are not rare. Suicide is understandable. If we think about that person in the Venn diagram, it really makes sense to the suicidal person. Suicide is not a crime. It is not a sin. It really is the final solution to an experience of unbearable psychological pain where the sufferer believes it's unending. If we can relieve that pain, even just a little bit, we can help that person find the will to live. Those who are most at risk for suicide are the least likely to ask for help. If they feel like they're a burden, it's going to be very hard for them to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm really having some thoughts that I need to end it. It's going to be hard. They're going to try to keep that a secret. And so we have to find our most at-risk fellow citizens and help them where they are. If we require them to ask for help, they will continue to die. We do have incredible things like the suicide prevention hotline. I want you guys to make sure that that's programmed into your phone. So I think I took the image out of the deck, but behind me on my little background screen, the phone number is 1-800-273-TALK. That is a phone number to have programmed into your phone. It might not be for you and it might not be for now, but someday that phone number could help save a life. You don't have to be suicidal to call that number. When you call that number, it's going to ring through, it's going to answer and say, press 1 if you're a veteran. If you're a veteran and you want to speak with folks that are trained for veterans specifically, it'll ring to a veterans crisis line. Otherwise, it's going to ring towards your local call center. If you have a 208 area code in your phone, it's going to ring to the Idaho call center. If you have a 775 area code or any of the Nevada area codes, it's going to ring you to the Nevada crisis line. And there you can talk to someone and say, I'm really concerned about my brother. This is what I've noticed. They can help you come up with a plan and find local resources. Maybe you just need to practice it. What I oftentimes tell people is you've just taken a Gatekeeper training. You can call that number, let them know that you're not in crisis, but you want to know what it's going to be like to call. And they're happy, as long as they're not super busy, they're happy to talk to you about what it's like and any concerns. It could be scary. You could be concerned that maybe they're going to send the police after you and you're going to be hospitalized for calling, and that's not true. So you can ask those questions. But that's one place to call 24/7. It's free. It's Misty's passion. Misty, would you like to add anything?
No, you've done a beautiful job. I love that we can reach out and get pointers on how to talk to our loved ones. It can help when in a scary time. And as I mentioned, my cell phone's in there too. You can text or call me anytime if you just need guidance, or even if you reached out and helped your loved one and just want to share that great news. That's always welcome too.
Thank you. So another truth is that a person most likely to prevent you from dying by suicide is someone that you already know. Those around us must know what to do if we become suicidal and how to recognize and to respond to our pain with bold, positive action. We can't be thinking that this is a behavioral health problem, that it's on a psychiatrist or a psychologist to solve. It's us, it's the people in our daily life. When we solve the problems that people kill themselves to solve, the reason for suicide disappears. Compassion, support, crisis intervention, problem resolution, and treatment all saves lives. And prior to making a suicide attempt, those in suicidal crisis are likely sending warning signs of their distress, their suicidal intent. So learning the warning signs and taking quick action during the window can help save lives. Not being afraid to talk about this topic is huge. So what are some of those clues and warning signs? Because the more clues and signs are observed, the more risk we have. And so we want to take all signs seriously. There's all kinds of direct verbal clues. Somebody might say, I've decided to kill myself. I wish I were dead. I am going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. If this doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. They might be direct like that. They might also be indirect, like in the video that we saw at the beginning of this training. They might be a little bit more vague. I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. My family would be better off without me, like my second grader. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. I mean, that statement alone, you think of the burden that they must feel they are to others. There might be behavioral clues. There's lists and lists and lists of risk factors and warning signs, but some are, a previous suicide attempt really increases the risk of dying by suicide. if they're acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, any type of co-occurring condition like depression, moodiness, hopelessness, putting affairs in order, giving away prized possessions, a sudden interest or disinterest in religion, and drug or alcohol abuse, or a relapse after a period of recovery. For someone who has fought very, very hard to find that place of recovery, to lose that becomes an incredible risk factor. They feel isolated from the community in which they were using, as well as isolated from the family or the community of recovery, and an additional setback and one more time of a failure, and internalizing that burdensomeness. Another behavioral clue would be unexplained anger, aggression, or irritability. And then there's situational clues. Someone who might be fired from work or expelled from school, if they experience an unwanted move, losing a major relationship, death of a spouse, a child, a best friend, especially if they've lost someone to suicide, that increases their risk. Diagnosis of a serious or a terminal illness, unexpected loss of freedom, a fear of punishment, or anticipated loss of financial security, or perhaps the family's financial security. If they lose a cherished therapist, a counselor, a teacher, any type of person that they look up to, especially if it was to suicide, and a fear of becoming a burden to others. So we need to ask them about it. We need to ask them directly. If you have any doubt, a gut feeling, you get a red flag, don't wait, ask the question. If the person is reluctant, you can be persistent. You can approach the conversation and come back to it. You can come back to it days later. You can come back to it minutes later. You can always circle back and do it again. You want to talk to the person when they're alone in a private setting or a semi-private setting. It might not just be one-on-one. It might be a couple of loved ones. It really depends on the relationship. And as you've seen, we're talking about some very complex things. It's not a linear path of this. It's not a domino effect. There are so many conditions to take into account here, but we are all empowered to intervene. We want to make sure that we allow that person to talk freely. They might say things that really make us uncomfortable, and we need to be able to sit with that discomfort. And offer hope in any way that we can. We want to make sure we have time for that conversation, and we want to have resources handy. So I know at the holiday gift drive, Misty was handing out QPR booklets. So if you did not get a QPR booklet, I'm happy to share them with you. If you look through that booklet, it's going to kind of in order go through this entire training. At the back of it is a QPR card that you can tear off and hand out to people. You can keep that in your wallet. We want to add additional phone numbers and counselors' names, anything that might be helpful to them. And asking the question is less important than the fact that you ask it. There's going to be a less direct approach. So it might be something like, have you been unhappy lately? Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so very unhappy lately that you're thinking about ending your life? Do you ever wish that you could go to sleep and never wake up? And then there's a more direct approach. You know, when people are as upset as you seem to be, they sometimes wish they were dead. I'm wondering if you're feeling that way too. You know, you look very miserable. I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? When was the last time you thought about suicide? Is life just so hard right now that it has you thinking about dying? This is the direct approach. And what I have learned through my experience with this is that being as direct as possible is welcome. It's a relief. And it helps us make sure that we are talking about the same thing. To ask a question like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? It misses the point, because for that suicidal person to come up with this solution to their unsolvable problem and their unbearable pain, they don't think it's going to hurt. And so they might answer you with, no, I'm not going to hurt myself, because they're going to kill themselves. So we want to be as direct as we possibly can. If you can't ask the question, find someone who can. For some people, it's too emotional, it's too painful. We need to find someone who can. I talk to people about, if you can't ask the question, let's call the hotline. Let's put them on speakerphone and let's let them guide the conversation. You can still be there present with them. But if this is too much, let the hotline guide this. It's important that we get it out there. There's some things to think about we don't want to do. We don't want to say, you're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? We don't ever want to put them on the defense. We don't ever want them to answer with, a lie or a no. We don't want them to feel like they're an additional burden. You wouldn't do anything stupid, would you? Suicide is a dumb idea. Surely you're not thinking about it. I know that these might seem silly, but they come out. We try to shut it down instead of sitting with the pain. And so we want to practice. If we were sitting together in a room, I would ask us to turn to each other, look someone in the eye, and ask this question out loud. Practice makes perfect. Practicing builds that muscle memory so that when we get into that crisis situation, we're able to ask the question. There's other trainings that are out there, and as COVID starts to subside and we start to be able to come together in person, we'll be able to do some of these practicing. There's really powerful trainings. I know that Misty has a bunch of them, and I have a bunch of them. And to be able to practice this with another person is going to be powerful, and hopefully we can get to that in the future. But my homework ask of you is that when you have some quiet time, when you're alone, to spend some time in the mirror, asking this, saying it out loud to just build the muscle memory. So let's persuade.
Can I?
Please.
I just really want to emphasize, because I know it is scary to ask the question, but you did such a beautiful job talking about the feeling of being a burden and getting that sense of relief. And so if you're hesitant to ask the question, they're feeling like they don't want to put a burden on you. They've already done too much, and they're going to protect you. If you ask directly, I am so worried about you, are you thinking of suicide? You give them permission to be honest with you, which means you're taking that sense of burdenness off of them, and they feel relief. So that's why that asking directly to them brings them relief as well, to be honest.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just am doing a time check. I know that we are getting very close to the top of the hour. We are going to push through and go through the rest of this training. And I understand if you have to drop off, time is precious. So it will be recorded and sent out following this training. So how do we persuade someone? We're not trying to coach them or lie to them. We want to show them that there's hope and that there's help available. How do we keep them alive? We want to listen to their problem, and we want to give them our full attention. We want to be fully present. We need to remember that suicide isn't the problem. This is the solution that they've come up with for some type of insolvable problem, some type of unsolvable pain that they're experiencing. This is their last resort. We really want to try to not rush to judgment. We need to offer hope in any form that we can find. We want to ask them, will you go with me to get help? Will you let me help you get help? Will you promise me not to kill yourself until we've found some help? Let's stay alive. Let's see where we can find this help. Your willingness to listen, to help, can rekindle hope and make all the difference for them. But you're not the counselor. And typically, if you had the power to solve their unsolvable problem, you would. But that's outside of our grasp. Let's figure out what is that underlying problem, and let's refer them to the appropriate help. Suicidal people often believe they can't be helped. We have to do more. The best referral involves taking them directly to someone who can help. And again, we're talking about so many different complex cases. It's hard to say this is the direct person who can help. Using something like the hotline, or up in Idaho, we do have access to crisis centers. If someone is in crisis, we can directly take them. I know that it's a bit of a trip, but we can physically take them to a crisis center. We can let them do an evaluation, de-escalate, and get connected to care. We're going to talk about the crisis centers in just a little bit, but the next best referral is getting a commitment to them to accept help and to make arrangements to get that help. And the third best referral is to give the referral the information. Maybe it's the QPR codes, it's programming the hotline into their phone, and really getting a good faith commitment not to complete or attempt suicide. And really any willingness to accept help at some time, even if it's in the future, is a good outcome. So I think this is really pertinent to some of that lower level suicidal ideation. And if figuring out, how to have these conversations in a more complex way, there's other trainings out there, which questions to ask, how to do safety planning. But I think of this third best referral as an educator. I had a little student who was in the special education program, and he was really struggling with behavior, with language, and he hated all of his helpers. He hated the OT, he hated the PT, and the family was just very resistant to having conversations. And so I approached an idea. I saw that he dropped his pencil with one hand and he picked it up with another, but he refused to write with it. Very low level problem, but it was something that was contributing to much, much, much more. And so I approached his family and I asked them to have this conversation. I planted the seed and I came back to it and I came back to it and I came back to it. And on the third time, when I approached the family about this and I had opened the door and they could begin to trust that I was there to talk about the same thing, I was there to talk about the best interest of their child, they finally opened up. And there were cultural barriers and there were myths about handedness, and we were able to get through all that. So I know that that's not an example related to suicide, but it's kind of that low level. If we've got concerns, we approach it, we approach it, we approach it, we give resources, and eventually they trust us and they're ready. And it's a good outcome. So for effective QPR, we need to say things like, I want you to live. I'm on your side. We'll get through that. For the person who feels isolated, to hear we, that changes everything. We need to also get other people involved. This can't be the burden of just one person. We need to ask the person who else could help you. There might be additional family members, friends. There might be faith leaders or perhaps medical physicians, their primary care physician who could help. There's a lot of people in the community who can be that support network and play a different role. There has to be a team. We have to be working together to provide counseling and treatment and whatever that underlying condition is. We need to follow up with a phone call, with a card, whatever feels comfortable with you, whatever your relationship is, but they need to know that you care what happens to them and that you're still there, and that caring can help save a life. So when we apply QPR, it plants that seed of hope and it helps prevent suicide. Another piece that we do need to talk about is lethal means. We worked with Boise Public Radio over the summer to put some pieces in place in rural communities on access to lethal means. So I'll send the links to those specials out. But means matters because those suicidal crises are often relatively brief. They can be undertaken quickly with very little planning. And so some methods are far more deadly than others. There's, case fatalities that range from, 1% to 80 to 90% of the most deadly. And so firearms are the most deadly means of suicide. And when we think back to that map of the United States, those dark blue states, those have a different firearm culture than other states. So we need to just take some additional precautions. 90% of those who survive even a nearly lethal attempt do not go on to die by suicide later. There's simple steps to increase a suicidal person's safety and reduce access to lethal means or other means within the home. Counselors and providers and family members need to be talking to at-risk people about it, finding out if there are firearms in the home or if they've been stockpiling medications or have access to drugs. And so we can limit access to those. It's temporary safety intervention. It's not anti-gun, it's not anti-anything. It's a temporary intervention. The state of Utah came up with a campaign that we love called Lock, Limit, Remove. We can think about that for firearms. We can think about that for medications, but specifically for guns. Gun owners, protecting your family is more than just keeping them safe from an accident or an attack. It involves being aware of warning signs of suicide and steps to prevent it, because together we can protect our family, our friends, and our freedom. But we need to be able to have a conversation about firearms. Lock it up when it's not in use. Limit access to it. Keep it in a safe. Put a picture of the thing that anchors you to life on top of that safe. And remove it. Remove it from the home when people are struggling. The firearm can come back when things improve. We're going to skip these videos. But family and friends can protect that person by storing the firearms away from the home. There's a lot more information about this, but being that it's, a higher percentage of suicides in Nevada and Utah, it's something to take into consideration. We're going to send this video to you as well. This is an overview of a healthcare initiative called Zero Suicide. And it's an initiative that both the state of Nevada and Idaho have underway. And it's something that we should probably take a look at and see if it's something that Duck Valley is ready to start looking at and applying some of the pieces to zero suicide throughout healthcare. It starts in healthcare, but it has components of everything within a community. Again, suicide is not a healthcare issue. It's not an education issue. It's an everybody issue, and everyone has a role to play. Oh, Idaho's crisis centers. So I'm going to send links to this. I'm working with the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline to develop some field trips, a field trip video of what do we do when a family member is in crisis? How do we navigate that crisis? So there are crisis centers in the states or in the cities of Boise, Caldwell, and Twin Falls. So if you have connections to those communities, those might be places to consider. These crisis centers are 24/7, they're free. It's a great place to go in to de-escalate, to get a shower, whatever the crisis might be, whether it's suicide or domestic violence or recovery, sobriety, a mental health crisis, for people who are experiencing incredible grief, they can go into crisis with that grief. This is another place to go in and to de-escalate, to have a quick evaluation, and to get connected to care. You don't leave the crisis center until you have an appointment in place for the future within a week of something to help address the underlying need. Safety planning. If we've got someone who's struggling, we really need to do some safety planning. I've left some paper safety plans behind over at the school, but there's also something called the My3 app that walks you through that safety planning. What are the warning signs that you're in crisis? What are some of your coping strategies, your distractions? Who is in your network to help? Down at the bottom, it has reasons for living. What is your purpose? What is your anchor? What connects you to life? And if that hasn't been identified, if a person doesn't feel like they have a purpose, that's what we're here for. That's the community. We have to give them a purpose. We have to name that purpose and help them know why they're here. And Misty, I see there's stuff going on in the chat, but I'm not reading it. Is there anything you want to add in or any questions to address right now?
Yeah, perfect. I'm just emphasizing the apps like My3 that you put up. I talked about Now Matters Now and Zero Suicide Adaptation for Indian Country. So that website's in the chat. And then Jim asked about a QPR booklet. So I know we have some here along with Medication Safe. I didn't know if you could send it electronically. So whatever's easiest. And then Lynn also has all of these materials at the school in an envelope we left.
Awesome. Yes, I don't have electronic copies of the QPR booklet, but I probably could get a hold of one. I will put all of these pieces together. Now Matters Now is incredible. There is a recorded article that's about 20 minutes long that focuses on Now Matters Now. It complements QPR so well. So we'll put a lot of these resources together electronically. And yes, we will leave some QPR booklets behind with the medication safes. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Misty. And Misty, just let me know when you want me to hit the slides.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And I know this is going on a bit longer, but we thought suicide postvention and grief was a really important discussion right now. There's so much loss. And so when you think about the grief that Shannon mentioned, how many people are impacted by one loss to suicide or even an attempt of suicide, you see the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, and go ahead and shift. But what's really going on for those people in bereavement is all of this. And we don't see this. And it's profound. It might impact your body. You feel ill. You feel exhausted, maybe irritable, holding in those emotions because you don't know how to share and people don't want to talk about it. Next. So you kind of have this void of grief, that typical pendulum. We have the hurt, the pain, the shock, the numbness, denial. This can't be real. When am I going to wake up? Anger. Absolutely anger at the person, which is a painful emotion to have when you love that person. I would say some people who have lost a loved one to suicide do feel relief because that loved one might have been in pain for so long, be it mental health or addiction pain, or maybe challenges with the law. And so there is a sense of relief that that pain is no longer there for them. And eventually we adjust, but we never want that person to be out of our memory. That grief just has to shift. And the next slide really shows you what grief from suicide looks like. You're going to come and go from sadness to depression to maybe a moment of joy, which is okay to feel that, and then back to anger and uncertainty. And the one main thing I will mention is that unknown, that looking for answers, that woulda, coulda, shoulda that Shannon mentioned. That is such a hard piece of suicide loss, but it is very, very typical of everyone who has lost a loved one. And another piece I will add, when I'm talking to someone who's lost a loved one, I'm always asking, have you had thoughts of suicide yourself? We want to check in because many survivors of suicide loss do get to that place. It doesn't mean they act on it. But if we can go in and have that conversation and support them and make sure they're taking care of themselves and have a support system, it can really, really give them relief as well. Are there any questions? We've covered so much information. I just want to give a moment. You can unmute if you want or type in the chat. Okay, so some common loss, I think we've kind of covered, that struggle to make sense, the unanswered questions. We have a dear friend who lost his son decades ago. He calls it the canyon of why. And that, you know, those walls, you just keep seeking those answers, and we might never know the real answer. We can assume, but that doesn't mean that's what it is. Blame ourselves, we blame others because we just can't understand it. And that shock and disbelief. Stigma is another hard one. When we put blame on ourselves or our family puts blame on each other, it's hard for us to reach out for help in our grief because of that stigma. That burdensomeness and that escape from pain, I think, is really important. They really felt they were giving that family something that they'd be better off with. We want to care for each other in this time of healing. Next, please. Then there's secondary losses, you know, the dreams, the families, the relationships. We might have a tight-knit community, but then our support systems are afraid to approach us and cause us more pain. I see that a lot. When I work with families and friends, I emphasize how important it is to remember the anniversaries, the birthdays, the holidays, and reach out and ask, use that person they lost, use the name, because we don't want them to erase that person from their memory. They're a part of their life, and suicide is a piece of them. It's not all of their life. And so recognizing that they might be hurting as the holiday or the anniversary comes up can really help them feel connected in a time of pain and isolation. Next, please. And I think, so I'm kind of ahead of myself here. These are the ways to help. Listen, there are no right things to say when it comes to this. We can listen, give space for that person to feel, be by their side is really what's important. They're not going to remember what you said. They're going to remember that you were there with them. So that compassion is so important. We cannot erase this pain, but we can be by their side to support them as they process it, as they release some of it, and as they develop some of the coping and healing down the road. I would imagine, like most trauma, it starts out right here in front of your face, and that's all you can see. Every moment of every day is that pain and that loss. But with time and healing, it's going to move back. It's still going to be here, and it's going to cross your vision and cross your memory, but not every moment and every day. And then eventually, you know, you're going to be able to manage it, and you're going to want to have those remembrances. Maybe the anniversary becomes a time you cherish with family to honor the loved one. We listen as often as we need to. They need to tell their story as often as they need to tell their story. And then you, as that helper, that caregiver, that loved one, might also need to take care of yourself in some way, be it getting out in nature, be it just healing or rest, or your own mental health help. Next, please. We also want to talk about attempt survivors. Shanna mentioned, 90% of those who attempt suicide, if they get the right help, never go on to take their lives. A suicide attempt or talking about suicide is the hugest scream for help that someone can give, and we want to hear it. So if someone takes their life and they get help and you bring them home, we don't want to push this under the rug. We don't want to pretend it never happened. And they might want to because they feel shame. I've had someone close to me, she went to the hospital, she survived, and she would say, oh, that was a stupid thing to do. I didn't really mean it. Well, I'm always going to remember that it happened. Whether she meant it or not, it was her way of communicating pain. And we want to help and say, have you had thoughts recently? How is your safety plan working for you? Are you able to talk to a support system as you're recovering from this? We want to make sure, like any other health concern, it's an ongoing conversation to make sure they're keeping themselves well. And what are the triggering events? So that safety plan that Shannon talked about is really important. What triggers us? And then if we feel that trigger, what de-escalates us? What brings us back grounded? Who are the people we can call? Who are the crisis lines or crisis centers that we can reach out to? It's managing our wellness. And when crises happen, we have a plan to take care of ourselves or bring people in to help us. Any questions on that? Okay, next, please. So that attempt data, it's huge. I want to say 10.7 million seriously considered suicide. We think about 5% of the population at every given moment, so 1 in 20. I know that about 20% of young people have serious thoughts of suicide, 20%. So that's 1 in 5 of our classroom students. And then 1.4 have made an attempt. The important thing here is that we hear them and give them the support so they don't go on to make that attempt. That's where zero suicide is really important. If we teach our helpers, our caregivers, our healers how to have this conversation when someone's in crisis and they get the right help and they feel heard, that's where we don't see them coming back time and again. If they have to keep going to the hospital, we're missing something. They're getting unmet needs. And so how do we better meet those needs and keep them safe? Next, please. So we really want to give them hope. Recovery is possible. Healing is really important. We talk about peer support specialists, and that's a part of the crisis lines, the NAMI warm line we have. Those are families and people with mental health challenges that live in recovery and well-being. And it's really important that you can see this is possible. To live a rich, healthy life with relationships and satisfying work is a possibility. Fostering that hope is crucial in someone choosing life and turning away from suicide thoughts. Promoting connectedness, this is a good sign. No, that's fine. Promoting connectedness can be to nature. For me, that's my grounding. I get out into the hills and everything seems okay, getting out of my head, like see you here. That can be my head, very often that ball of gook. And it's hard for us to cope. It's hard for us to think of who our support systems are when we're feeling chaotic. And so talking to someone, having them really hear us, helps us remember our reasons for living, helps us remember our support systems who we trust, and our coping strategies, which might be reaching out to a faith healer, which might be sleeping and eating properly. We can't cope if we aren't sleeping. And so you might notice with people you're worried about, if they're not getting good sleep, let's figure out how we help them start there. I know military and veterans, people with loss and trauma, if you're not sleeping through the night, we wake up with anxiety, depression, and it kind of spirals. So those are good starting places with your faith, your spirituality, your nutrition, and your sleep. Next. So preventing suicide is absolutely like a puzzle. Pieces can be all over the place, and that's where Shannon and I emphasize we all have a role to play. There might be people you trust to listen to you. There might be people you trust who are really good in a crisis and can stay calm and get you what you need. Then there's the educators who can share the information and do the outreach. There's our medical and mental health providers who can reach out to for that healing as well. So, and then there's, us at the state or other nonprofits who want to support your efforts and really help your community grow those seeds of hope into an incredibly healing prevention strategy for you. And I think that's all I have, Shannon. I think it goes back to you.
I'll jump in here. Compassion fatigue, caretaking, it can be exhausting. And so we have to practice our own self-care. And I really appreciate this template. This is a template of an action plan. And so I encourage people to think about all of these different buckets. What are the different pieces that really help me fill my bucket? As far as the community, I know COVID makes things very difficult. But what are the community activities that really help me feel better and recharge me? As far as work goes, what are the pieces of my job that help lift me up? If I can list these in kind of a reflective way, this is a plan that I can come back to. Intellectually, what are the things that help stimulate me and make me feel better? Emotionally, the environment, like Misty said, for me, it's downhill skiing. That is the activity that recharges me and makes me feel at peace, at one with some type of higher being. For me, it's skiing or just being in the snow. Summers are hard. That's not accessible. Physically, walking, exercising, dancing, what is it? And then that spiritually, financially, what are the things that we can do to take care of ourselves? This is important, especially if we're dealing with someone who struggles with suicide or struggles with mental health and substance abuse. This doesn't mean spending a lot of money. This is all stuff that we should be doing within our daily routines. So my call to action as we wrap things up here is to help yourself. If you've found that any of this presentation has brought anything up for you, please help yourself. Please reach out to Misty. You can reach out to me at the Speedy Foundation, reach out to the hotline, talk with someone, set up your own self-care routine or a safety plan. Or if this has brought up a red flag for anyone else, if you've got a gut feeling that you need to reach out to someone, do it. Help others. Let's prepare resources. Let's figure out what are the resources that are available in Elko and in Mountain Home and Boise. What are the resources that are available virtually so that if somebody becomes escalated, if they are in crisis and need help, do we know where we can go for help? We want to spread the word. We want to share this information with other people. Maybe we need to host additional trainings or additional meetings. Some of those can be done virtually, and then eventually, hopefully we can do them in person very, very soon. We do have 2 trainings that are coming up tomorrow and the next day. They just happen to be lined up like that. And I know at short notice, we'll get some more of these trainings scheduled for January, February. But mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid, it's the nuts and the bolts about mental health and substance use for early intervention. And so as we wrap things up, I just ask us all to remember, all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of attempt suicide are met with agreement and relief. So please don't hesitate to get involved or to take the lead. And Misty and I are available for any questions. We also have our contact information on the screen for you to reach out in the future.
Shannon, I wanted to add, I forgot, there are grief support groups specific to suicide bereavement. They're very unique, so that they are feeling that guilt, that anger, hypervigilance for your loved ones who are still here. So it's a really powerful group where they might be 2-3 years down the road, maybe even decades down the road in their bereavement, can be really helpful. We have one at my office with Jeanette, who lost her daughter. She's been running this group for 2 decades, 20 years, and it's virtual. So anyone from anywhere can join in if that's something that you find might help you or someone you care about. And then also AFST.org is a national organization that helps with suicide bereavement as well, and they have virtual support groups. So I do encourage that if you know someone's struggling with the grief. And then also, I'll be in town. If you wanted some of these materials, just text me.
Awesome. In addition to grief support groups, there's also the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has something called Caring Connections. So those are people with lived experience. They are survivors of suicide loss, and they feel empowered to share that story with other people. And so they will be a ways out. It's not a new loss necessarily. They've gone through a training program, and they're there to connect. So if you've lost a brother or a son or a mom, you can type into that you would like to be connected with someone else who has lost that same relationship. And they can listen to you, they can share their grief journey, and just offer kind of that one-on-one support that maybe a grief group has something to offer, and a one-on-one has, something else to offer. I wanted to show you that I will be putting together on the Speedy Foundation's page. I'll start putting together all of the resources that Misty and I have been talking about and brainstorming. I'll start to build them here. We'll put the recording of this training there so that it can be a place where you can come and have easy access to Nevada resources, Idaho resources, AFSP resources, and the likes. All right. So I know we went over by about 20 minutes, but we really do appreciate your time today. Are there any other questions or connections?
I'd like to send a comment out to you folks.
Please.
Am I still unmuted, or can you hear me?
We hear you.
Good.
I want to thank you folks and everybody that attended today. This is Brian Thomas. And I know it falls on the leadership when it comes to suicides, and we are working critically serious to try to curb all of these suicides with a Councilman Arnold Thomas is very, very instrumental in working with the public on this, and also you folks and everything else that he was doing. And it's really rough on families. I know it. I've lived it, surviving it, and I really want to thank everybody that has been, talking to you folks and stop by and visit with you folks. And we will look forward for a better next year. And with folks with help from folks like you all, it's really a welcome to Duck Valley from our tribal leadership. And we appreciate it. We had a hard day yesterday, my family and I, but we made it. We survived that. And with all the support we have, we will be doing a lot better. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming us into your community during these holidays and during this time of grief. I feel honored to be here and to just offer the lived experience, the resources that I've found to be beneficial, and to just listen. All right, everyone. Thank you again for your time. We'll get an email with all of these resources out to you shortly, and we'll include grief counseling information as well. Awesome.
Take good care, everyone.
Bye-bye.